The crown was still warm from her head when I felt my son's claws pierce my palm, and I knew, before the metal even hit the marble, that everything I'd built was about to shatter. The scent hit me first, silver and moonflower. The acrid bite of fierce sweat from 300 pack members holding their breath, and underneath it all, the faint trace of kitchen grease and desperation that clung to the Omega girl frozen at the edge of the crowd. My son Aurelius was 3 years old, barely tall enough to see over the ceremonial dais, but when he ripped that Luna crown from Kashasa's perfectly coiffed head, he moved with the certainty of an alpha twice his age. The sound of gold skittering across stone was obscene in the silence. I watched the crown tumble down the platform steps 1, 2, 3, each impact against marble like a heartbeat stopping. It rolled across polished stone, past the feet of beta wolves in their ceremonial furs, past the visiting dignitaries who'd traveled from the Eastern Territories to witness what should have been a union of power, and came to rest against scuffed boots so worn I could see the leather cracking at the toes. My eyes traveled up from those boots, past legs, trembling beneath a gray dress that had been mended so many times, the original fabric was barely visible. Past hands, raw and reddened from years of scrubbing other wolves' dishes. Past a slender throat where her pulse hammered so hard I could see it from 20 feet away. And then to her face. Honey-colored eyes wide with terror, dark hair escaping from a braid that had probably been neat this morning before her 14-hour shift in the pack kitchens. She looked like she wanted the earth to open and swallow her whole. I knew her name was Levvenia. I'd learned it 3 days ago when I'd found her in the garden with my son, watching him present her with a dandelion like it was spun gold. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the moon goddess had been watching too. Papa. Aurelius's voice cut through the shocked silence, high and clear and absolutely certain. The crown picked wrong. Kashasa's face had gone the color of bleached bone. Her hands, still raised from where the crown had been seconds before, trembled in the air like she couldn't quite believe they were empty. You little. The venom in her voice made my wolf snarl beneath my skin, but she caught herself, smoothed her features into something resembling patience, even as I watched rage pulse at her temples. Alpha Marcus, control your child. But Aurelius had already climbed down from my arms, was already moving through the crowd with a purpose that made the fur on the back of my neck stand straight up. Because I'd seen that look before, not in my son, but in my mate, in the moments before she'd known things that shouldn't have been knowable, the same certainty, the same unshakable conviction that she was seeing something the rest of us were blind to. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, because you're gonna need your whole community for where this is headed. Trust me. My son reached the Omega girl, and I watched her drop into a bow so low her forehead nearly touched the ground. Her whole body shook, and the scent of her fear spiked so sharp it made my teeth ache. She thought she was being punished, thought she'd somehow caused this disruption, this disgrace, this moment that would be whispered about in pack territories for generations. She had no idea she was about to become legend. Aurelius bent down and picked up the crown with both hands, the sacred Luna crown that had been blessed by the moon goddess herself 500 years ago, the crown that had never, in all those centuries, been rejected. Not once. The gold caught the afternoon sun and threw light across my son's face, illuminating eyes that suddenly looked far too old for a 3-year-old child. Eyes that looked like they were seeing through veils the rest of us couldn't even perceive. This one, he said, and his voice had gone quiet, reverent, the way he sounded when he talked about his mother who'd died bringing him into this world. This one loves me, Papa. Can't you smell it? And goddess help me, I could. Now that he'd said it, now that he'd named it, I could smell it beneath the fear and the grease and the exhaustion. Something warm and protective and utterly genuine. The scent of someone who'd comforted my son when he cried, who'd made him laugh when I'd been too buried in pack politics to notice he was drowning. The scent of someone who'd seen a grieving child and chosen kindness when she had every reason to choose survival instead. Levvenia's head was still bowed, her whole body rigid with terror. Young master, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean I would never. Look at me. The command left my throat before I'd consciously decided to speak, rough with alpha power that made her flinch, even as she obeyed. When her honey-colored eyes met mine, I saw everything she expected. Punishment, expulsion, maybe worse. What she didn't see was what I was beginning to understand, that my son had just upended the entire pack hierarchy because he'd recognized something the moon goddess herself had placed in front of us. Aurelius lifted the crown high above his head, standing on his toes to reach as far as he could. The moon goddess told me, he said, matter of fact, like he was explaining where he'd left his toys. She told me in my dreams. She said the crown would show everyone what I already knew. This is insanity, Kashasa hissed, stepping down from the platform with her ceremonial gown trailing behind her like a weapon. That child has been manipulated by a servant with delusions of... The crown touched Levvenia's dark hair, and the world stopped breathing. Light bloomed from the ancient gold, soft at first, like the first hint of dawn breaking over the mountains, then brighter, warmer, until it pulsed with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat I could hear hammering in Levvenia's chest. The metal seemed to mold itself to her head, adjusting, settling, claiming her, with a certainty that made my wolf howl with recognition deep in my bones. I'd seen a Luna crown twice before in my lifetime. My mother, when I was a boy. My mate, Serafina, when I'd claimed her as mine. Neither time had the crown done this. Neither time had the moon goddess herself reached down through the veil and said, "This one. This is the one I chose." The light grew stronger, bright enough that wolves in the front rows had to shield their eyes. It cast shadows across the ceremonial grounds that seemed to writhe and dance, and in those shadows I could swear I saw the shape of a massive wolf, larger than any living creature had a right to be, with eyes that held the silver light of the full moon. The shape moved around Levvenia like a guardian, like a blessing, like a brand that marked her as chosen. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. But the crown remained, sitting on Levvenia's head, like it had been forged specifically for her skull. Like every Luna who'd worn it before had just been keeping it warm until its true owner could claim it. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either worship or war. I watched Kashasa's face contort through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Shock, disbelief, rage, and finally something cold and calculating that made my alpha instincts scream danger. She'd worn a mask this whole time, I realized. 6 months of courtship, of political maneuvering, of playing the perfect Luna candidate, and I'd never once seen the truth beneath it. "Remove it." Her voice had gone flat, empty of the honeyed tones she'd used to charm my counsel. "Remove that crown immediately, or I'll..." "You'll what?" The words came from Titus, my beta, who'd been Kashasa's strongest supporter. He stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face pale but resolute. "Challenge the moon goddess herself?" I watched the crown choose Kashasa. We all did. And I've been around long enough to know when something is divine will versus political convenience. Levvenia swayed on her feet, and I moved without thinking, crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, and caught her elbow before she could collapse. The moment my skin touched hers, electricity arced between us. Not the mate bond. I'd felt that once, knew its shape and weight and devastating certainty. This was different. Newer, like the beginning of something that would take years to fully form, if we let it. She looked up at me with those terrified honey eyes, and I saw my own fear reflected back. Neither of us had chosen this. Neither of us wanted the complications, the impossible situation, the weight of a pack's expectations settling on shoulders that had only ever been allowed to carry serving trays and laundry baskets. "I can't," she whispered, so quiet only I could hear it. "Alpha, please, I can't be, I don't know how to." Neither did I. The admission came easier than I'd expected. When my father died and left me a pack in shambles, I was 22 years old and convinced I'd destroy everything he'd built. But you know what I learned? I kept my voice low, intimate, aware of 300 pairs of ears straining to hear us. The moon goddess doesn't choose the qualified. She chooses the necessary. Papa's right. Aurelius wedged himself between us, grabbing both our hands with his small ones. "You just gotta try, Mama Levvenia, that's what Papa always tells me." The word mama sent a ripple through the crowd. gasps, murmurs, the sound of a social order cracking down its foundation. I should have corrected him, should have maintained some semblance of propriety, but looking at my son's face, bright with hope for the first time since I'd announced my intention to marry Kashasa, I couldn't bring myself to take that away from him. This is a disgrace. Kashasa's father, Beta Gregorius of the Northern Territories, pushed through the crowd with violence in every line of his body. You would elevate an Omega, a kitchen servant, above my daughter, above centuries of tradition and breeding, and watch your tone, Gregorius. My alpha voice rolled across the courtyard like thunder, making wolves drop their eyes and bare their throats in automatic submission. You're speaking about my Pax Luna, the one chosen by the crown, blessed by the moon goddess, and accepted by my heir. If you have objections, you're welcome to take them up with the divine. His face purpled with rage, but he was smart enough not to push an alpha in front of his own pack. Instead, he turned to his daughter. We're leaving. Let this fool discover what happens when he lets sentiment overrule sense. Kashasa's eyes locked on mine, and in them I saw a promise. This wasn't over. She gathered her ceremonial robes with trembling hands, and for a moment I thought I saw a genuine hurt beneath the rage. But then her gaze slid to Levvenia, and what I saw there was pure venom, the look of a predator who'd been denied a kill and would remember every detail of the prey that escaped. You'll regret this, Marcus. Her voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for me, but in the supernatural silence of 300 wolves holding their breath, it carried. When your pack starves because you've alienated every ally you had, when your enemies smell weakness and come circling, when that Omega fails at every basic duty a Luna is meant to perform, remember that I offered you strength and you chose this. She turned on her heel and stalked toward the pack house, her father following close behind. I should have felt relief, should have felt the weight of a mistake avoided, a bullet dodged. Instead, I felt the cold certainty that I'd just made an enemy far more dangerous than any I'd faced in battle. The crown pulsed once more on Levvenia's head, as if reminding us all that none of this had been my choice, or hers. The moon goddess had her own plans, and we were all just players in a game whose rules we'd never fully understand. Alpha Marcus. The high priestess stepped forward, ancient and bent with age, but moving with purpose. Her clouded eyes fixed on Levvenia with an intensity that made the girl shrink back against me. The crown has not glowed since the first Luna walked these lands. The old texts speak of it, that when darkness threatens to consume a pack, when choices made from logic would lead to ruin, the goddess herself intervenes. She sends a Luna who leads not with power, but with heart. She's an Omega, someone in the crowd muttered. I couldn't identify who, but the sentiment rippled through the assembled wolves like poison in water. How can an Omega protect us? Lead us? How can she not? Aurelius's small voice shouldn't have carried, but it cut through the murmurs like a blade. The crown picked her. That means she's stronger than all of you, doesn't it? 'Cause the goddess doesn't make mistakes. That's what you always say at temple. The priestess's wrinkled face split into a smile that showed too many teeth. The child speaks truth. Perhaps we've forgotten, in our obsession with bloodlines and rank, that strength comes in forms we don't always recognize. The Omega who survives when she has nothing, is she not stronger than the Beta who's never known hunger? The servant who chooses kindness when cruelty would be easier, is she not braver than the warrior who fights because it's his only skill? I felt Levvenia's pulse racing beneath my fingers, still gripping her elbow to keep her upright. She smelled like fear and shock and something else, something that reminded me of Serafina in her final moments, whispering that I needed to find love again, that I needed to give Aurelius a mother who would cherish him. My dead mate had known, somehow, that logic and politics wouldn't save our son. That he needed something I couldn't give him alone. Levvenia Aurelia. I spoke her full name formally, letting my alpha power infuse every syllable so there could be no doubt, no question of my intent. The crown has chosen you, my son has chosen you. And I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to do, the bridges I was burning, the enemies I was making. I choose to honor their wisdom. Will you accept the role of Luna to Silver Crest Pack? Her honey eyes were drowning in tears she refused to let fall. Her honey eyes were drowning in tears she refused to let fall. I watched her throat work as she swallowed, watched her look at Aurelius, who was staring up at her with absolute faith, watched her gaze sweep across the crowd of wolves who would either accept her or destroy her. There was no middle ground for an Omega wearing a Luna crown. She would rise to heights no one of her rank had ever reached. Or she would be crushed beneath the weight of expectations she could never fulfill. "I accept," she whispered, and the words were barely audible, but they rang through the ceremonial grounds like a bell tolling. "I accept, though I don't understand why. I accept, though I'm terrified. I accept, because—" Her voice broke and she looked down at my son. "Because someone has to love this child the way he deserves. And if the moon goddess thinks I'm capable of that, then I have to try." The crowd erupted. Some in cheers, some in outrage, some in the kind of shocked silence that precedes either revolution or revelation. But I barely heard them. I was watching Levvenia's face as the reality of what she'd just agreed to settled over her features. The fear giving way to something fiercer, something that looked almost like determination. The high priestess raised her gnarled hands and the noise died instantly. "Then let it be witnessed by all gathered here, by the moon goddess who watches from above, by the spirits of every Luna who came before. Levvenia Aurelia is Luna of Silver Crest Pack. From this moment until her last breath, she is our heart, our conscience, our connection to the divine. And any who challenge her challenge the goddess herself." She moved forward and placed her withered hands on either side of the crown, and I felt power surge through the air, ancient, vast, terrifying in its certainty. The crown's glow intensified one final time, then settled into the metal itself, leaving it looking exactly as it always had, except now it sat on dark hair instead of auburn, on an Omega of a Beta's daughter, on a woman who'd spent her life invisible and would now be seen by everyone. "The ceremony is complete," the priestess announced and stepped back. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is just the beginning. Levvenia's story, our story, is about to get so much more complicated. Drop a like if you believe in moon goddess magic, and share this with someone who needs to know that even the invisible can become legendary. Aurelius threw himself at Levvenia's legs, wrapping his small arms around her with a fierceness that made my chest ache. She hesitated only a moment before dropping to her knees and pulling him close, and I watched my son, my grieving, lonely, heartbroken son, finally relax in someone's arms the way he used to with his mother. I'd made a lot of choices as alpha, led my pack through war, famine, political upheaval, made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost them. But standing there, watching an Omega kitchen servant hold my son while wearing the Luna crown, I knew this was either the best choice I'd ever make or the one that would destroy everything I'd built. The crown was still warm from Kashasa's head when I'd felt my son's claws pierce my palm. Now, watching Levvenia stand with Aurelius in her arms and the crown glowing softly in the fading sunlight, I understood what the moon goddess had been trying to tell us all along. Sometimes the bonds that save us aren't the ones we choose. They're the ones that choose us, marked in gold and blessed in light and carried forward by a 3-year-old who saw what the rest of us were too blind to recognize. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more impossible love stories where the moon goddess rewrites destiny. Share this with someone who needs to remember they're worthy of their own crown. And drop your city in the comments so I can send you a hug across the miles.